I am over the past couple of years, I've been creating a method called HYPOXiX and a breathing technique called breathography. And I created this actually breathography I created many years ago when I was working with postnatal clients. And I originally developed it to increase activation of the transversus abdominis, the internal and the external oblique, and create stability in the spine and also help heal diastasis recti. So it all started there. I've been a personal trainer for almost 20 years now. I was a professional, had a professional Broadway career. I was a singer, I was a dancer, and I was training all while I was doing that. So that's my background. I have a bachelor's and a master's in exercise science. And so as I was supporting myself as an artist, as a trainer, I started getting deeper and deeper into training postnatal women and also using breath work to help assist that. When I first started training postnatal women, I found that there had to be a more effective, specific breathing methodology that could help a larger percentage of the women who were coming to me with diastasis. And especially when I was training women remotely, it was difficult because I couldn't have my hands on them to know exactly where they were in their breath cycles, or exactly were they really getting that transversus abdominis engaged, were we really healing the diastasis? I just, and I'm always worried about everything. I'm sure worry fuels half of my decisions, but that's gotten better with the breath work over time. But I felt concerned. I felt concerned with the remote sessions that I wasn't giving them exactly what they needed, especially in the early stages of postnatal. So this is the birth of an invention I call the AB ribbon, which I now use with all in-person clients, but also online clients and students who come into the HYPOXiX world. And it started as just me tying ribbons around these postnatal women's their waists. But it's not an aesthetic thing. It can easily be perceived as, oh, this girl, she's a celebrity trainer. She ties a ribbon around a waist. She's trying to get them skinnier. It has nothing to do with that. It actually was born out of training these postnatal women and not putting it at the belly button, but above the belly button at the base of the rib cage, so that they could feel when they were at their maximum inhale and when they were at their maximum exhale. And it was great because when I was doing the remote sessions, I could put a metronome on and I could keep them at a very specific breathing cadence, so that I knew that they were slowly exhaling for 8 seconds and they were inhaling for 2 seconds. And I loved the controlled nature of that, because over time they could learn that tempo and that frequency and that intensity of breathing, and it almost became second nature over time. So we started doing this 2-8 breath, with the ribbon or the belt or whatever they could find that was fairly rigid, so they could feel the tension on the inhale and then feel the looseness of that proprioceptive feedback of that device being loose on the exhalation, with the metronome timing it for 8 seconds. That was the first stage of it. And the first stage of breathography, and I called it breathography, just, stems out of my former career as a Broadway dancer, choreography. But I called it breathography because it ended up being this like choreography of breath and very specific. So when I started teaching the 8-second exhale, at first, I was just doing it on a blowing sound to create a little resistance for the abdominals. But over time, I found that it was more effective to give them a grouping of a variety of sounds, so that we could breathe together. And I, as the trainer, and the client or the student, we could mirror one another with very specific sounds that we were making over the course of the 8-second exhalation, which helped with regulation and me being able to teach them, as I cued them through, regulation of frequency, intensity, duration, and tempo of the breath. And so the 4 breath stages that I started teaching, and this was, like a couple of years in my basement, kind of being a mad scientist, figuring out exactly, what sounds worked at what point. But what I found was that it was most effective if you started on a blowing sound for 2 seconds and then started hissing and then started shushing, and then for the last 2 seconds, like shushing like you're an angry librarian. And I had it kind of backwards at first. First I was shushing, then I was blowing, hissing. But over about like 2 years of experimentation with online remote clients, I just found that this helped with something I call the breath crescendo, which is you start exhaling at a very low intensity so that you can sustain the breath for 8 seconds. Otherwise, you're blowing all the air out in 2 seconds and you're hyperventilating during exercise, which is not great. And you're just not sustaining that 8-second exhale. So,
and we see it quite a lot, that people that do lack control will just dump the air out, and so
exactly.
can you give us a little demo of that 8-second exhale, and as you blend those sounds, because I think it's really important. When I look at extended exhales with a lot of people, we either dump it out and then we're kind of crawling to get to the end of like, oh wait, I've still got 5 more seconds to exhale and I just dumped out 80% of the air. And so
exactly,
that adding in an element of, sound or articulation to actually just have the impact of slowing it down and creating the control, I think is really interesting. So can you show us exactly what you mean with the 8-second exhale?
Absolutely. So I always start the 8-second exhale with 2 sniffs of air through the nostrils, and that's very specific as well. So, and I decided to do that just because of the power of the nasal inhalation and because I'm choosing to do a mouth exhale for the purposes of making the sounds and also giving the abdominals the resistance for the, at first postnatal women, but now we know everyone needs this and everyone can benefit from it in their exercise routine. It's very important to get the benefits of the nasal breathing by taking the 2 sniffs of air through the nostrils. So it sounds like this: 1, 2. Finish. So you hear the difference between the soft shish, I call it, and the loud shish. I used to, like, when I was training clients, I used to say more like blow, hiss, soft shish, loud shish. But over time, I found that the soft shish kind of sounds like sausage. And so a lot of clients' kids were making fun of me. They're like, oh, that's the sausage girl. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I remember one day I was looking at Vimeo and I was looking at the captions and it said sausage and then loud shish. And I was like, well, that's not what I intended. And then over time, I did find with that like mirroring effect of us breathing together and making those sounds together, it's very helpful in teaching someone to do a continuous exhale versus, and so if I cue them, blow that birthday candle out on the blow, but don't blow too hard because you'll release your air too quickly. And, so it's been really, was the start of it. It had nothing to do at all with hypoxic training, but I started that and I invented that back. I mean, I think I was at that time, I was in Mamma Mia on Broadway. I was a swing in the show. So I was backstage I think I was finishing my bachelor's in exercise science at the time, but I was becoming very obsessed with breath work. And so I started writing papers, as many papers as I could on, even if the professor was like, yeah, I want you to write something on like fast twitch muscle fibers. I like tried to figure out some way that I could like tie breath work into. Exactly. Like breath work. Yeah. If you do it fast, Wim Hof style, you're probably activating more type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers. And so here's, the 20-page paper.
So is there a moment, because I'm really interested by this, was there a moment, like, I think everyone's discovery of breath work is really interesting to me. Like what for you was, because it's not common knowledge, well, I assume, but I work with enough people across the different fields, I'm sure it's not common knowledge through theater and Broadway. It's definitely not common knowledge through most aspects of personal training. It's still in this kind of like developmental stage. So what was it for you where you're like, breath work, I'm obsessed with that now? Like what happened?
Yeah. No, it's such a great question because I think that people would think, oh, I was a professional singer, so probably I found breath work at that point, because you have to be like very masterful with your breathing and being able to exhale as long as possible. I also am a certified Pilates instructor, and I got certified in Pilates years ago, and that's steeped in breath work. So you would have thought that those would have been like the ding, ding, ding moment. Oh my gosh, I feel so amazing with the breath work. But honestly, it was really when I started digging into the research, because I get so excited by reading papers. And so when I started to see that through breath work, we could improve exercise, when I started seeing I can improve exercise performance. And at that time I was like, any certification that I can do for my clients. I was probably 7 years into my personal training career. I was starting my own personal training company, and I was very rooted in like the corrective exercise realm. And I'm still obsessed with just learning and certifications. It's so exciting to me. And I remember, and I think it probably was a combination of digging into the research for one of the undergrad papers looking at heart rate variability. And that started to blow my mind. And this was like probably 10, 12 years ago. In combination with me doing a course through Posture Restoration Institute. And they're just so fantastic. And the way that they use breath to engage and like increase and like upregulate the internal obliques, transversus abdominis, and just the case studies that had, and just anecdotally the experiences that, PRI students have had, musculoskeletally, just in helping to recover like SI joint pain with simply just being able to move the ribs in a new way based on breath was so incredibly exciting to me. And so as I started to dig into that and learn the positions of PRI and learn how, I can direct breath. And then Feldenkrais. And then, so it was kind of like layering and layering, layering. And this was probably when I was exiting my Broadway career and less in like the Pilates reformer world at that point, because I had done a lot more Pilates before that, but it was just a simple inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale. It's like you're cueing the breath, but you're not really understanding like the physiology of it and how it can shift you so much positively biomechanically by using your breath in various ways. And so then I became very excited with, using forced exhalations for getting certain, I'm really obsessed with the core. I think it's probably my training with postnatal women, but just using all of the literature that has just like a lot of amazing research actually out of Korea, that's looked at breathing devices and using resisted breathing devices to increase activation of certain muscles that some people have a hard time activating when they're performing exercise. And when I started using resisted exhalations, I even got some of those resisted breathing devices and used those with some clients. And that was really, really helpful in recovering low back pain. I had one particular client who had a combination of a history of herniated discs, sciatica from that, and also was postnatal. And she was a new client at that time. And so I was trying to help her with her just stabilizing intervertebrally, because from the outside she looked really strong. It almost didn't make sense that she would be someone who would chronically suffer herniated disc, because she had like really nice stability, didn't hyperflex in her low back. And so I think for someone like her, she needed something extra to help stabilize teeny muscles. And maybe for her, it was like, I need to get more activation of the transversus abdominis to maybe even increase activation of the multifidi fibers, which for anyone on the call who doesn't know what those muscles are, those are the tiniest muscles in the vertebrae that connect the vertebrae intervertebrally. And a lot of research has shown that if you get a quality contraction of the transversus abdominis while pulling the navel to the spine, especially on exhale, you'll increase activation of the multifidi. That's a really important muscle for someone who has a history of low back pain or herniated disc, because it tends to turn off on the side of back pain. So she was having pain on her left side, and her MRIs did show that she had inhibited and atrophied multifidi on that side. And so I believe that, for someone like her, she experienced a lot of benefits from performing this breath work in conjunction with exercise, because it helped to stabilize her spine and also increased activation of key muscles that were most likely inactive. And we confirmed that, with the MRI imaging. And someone like her, she also suffered with anxiety and depression, and she definitely connected to the breath work, because it was simultaneously helping her to feel a lot more calm, not only after exercise, but during the exercise. A lot of people don't really love to exercise. You kind of drag yourself into it and force yourself into it. And I always say to the clients who use that 8-second exhale and use the breathography technique in conjunction with exercise, it's not going to be easy at first, but once you learn it and it becomes organic, you're going to feel those HRV benefits, not only after exercise, but also during exercise. Even when you're doing high intensity, even when you're spiking your sympathetic nervous system on purpose, there are going to be moments of increased calm and even increases in that parasympathetic nervous system, even when spiking your sympathetic nervous system. This is something I think we talked about last time we talked, which is, the benefits of spiking sympathetic and also parasympathetic. And I always wondered, when we're performing high intensity exercise, is it a true on-off switch? Like when we're getting super high sympathetic, like in Wim Hof breathing, or, and when we're sprinting uphill, can the controlled breathing also help us feel more calm and also help lessen the stress of the sympathetic nervous system? And I believe that is true. And over the past year, I've read quite a few studies that look at, like balancing that HRV when performing high intensity exercise, which I think is really important, because when we perform anything high intensity or anything very stressful, it's very, it's good, and we adapt to that stress, but minimum effective dose, like lessening that stress so that we're not, okay, catecholamines, the stress hormones, we need them, but let's not overdose ourselves with those things. If it's going to take us longer to recover, just find that minimum effective dose. And so, gosh, rambling. Where was I?
Well, I want to pause there because it's so important. We talk a lot about this in the training, right? That the idea that just because it's exercise, gives it a positive or negative bias, but to the nervous system, it's a heightened sympathetic state. And what you're kind of describing here is when you bring that element of breath control to the high intensity thing, which my nervous system is just perceiving, right? Stress, good or bad, it's just exercise is stressful. But here, right. Bring along this breath control that kind of attenuates that response and says, yes, sympathetic arousal, but because I have control over my breath, I think there's this very important distinction between, is my breath happening to me or am I doing my breath? Right. And if you're doing
absolutely
or this controlled exhale, you're controlling your breath. And we know when we actually look at kind of like the functional MRIs that a different part of your brain is controlling that, right? We're moving from brainstem to cerebral cortex. And that locus of control changes, and it changes what the nervous system is interpreting. Am I running from a tiger or am I running up a hill and controlling my breath? Like there's a different response there because it's very different to, right? Like your
absolutely
can't help but take that input and bring it alongside. Yes, my heart rate's up, my blood pressure's up, my muscles are twitching, but I'm also controlling my breath and there's a long exhale happening here. Let me bring the parasympathetic activation to meet that sympathetic activation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that it's also just so important for consistency in exercise to find those moments of parasympathetic and control and feeling like you're not being attacked when you're exercising. And so this is something I've worked on with clients for a long time. And it really wasn't until I found breath work that I was like, ding, ding, ding. Like I wish I had been doing this for the past 20 years, because it's amazing the difference in psychology, even at the top of a session, because you get that Pavlovian response to anything. And so, when over time, as their body's adapting and they're realizing, okay, I don't have to feel as panicked when I'm sprinting, or even when I'm walking on the treadmill, or when I'm lifting weights, because I have a memory now, a very distinct memory of this feeling pretty good while I'm doing it. There's something, and even if they can't, even if they can't put their finger on exactly why or exactly what it is, it's really powerful, that nervous system response. And it's incredibly exciting as a trainer who's just trying to get clients to be as consistent as possible, because we know that consistency is much more important than intensity, whether it's breath work or exercise or, whatever, mobility or whatever it is that you're working on.
Yeah. Insert thing here, right? Consistency is really key.
Yes.
I want to kind of come back a little bit, because I think this evolution of something that started out really as a biomechanical and postural tool then evolved into more of a biochemistry, right? When we start to look at hypoxia.
Yes.
So, where was the transition or the shift from and maybe it's not a shift, maybe it's just an additional, there's another benefit here. So the kind of a two-part question, like we'll start with a grand overview of what is hypoxia and why is kind of lowering oxygen levels intermittently beneficial. And where was perhaps that kind of realization that, yes, this was starting as a tool, to help postpartum women with diastasis, but I'm actually starting to see these physiological benefits coming from intermittent hypoxia.
Yes, absolutely. And that is, it's a very clear moment actually when there was a shift. Well, a couple of moments. So, blow, hiss, soft shish, loud shish. Now I'm doing this for years. And the reason this is easy for me to remember, because this is easy for the world to remember, the pandemic. strikes, and everything changes for everyone. Everyone has pulse oximeters on hand, of course, because when hypoxia hits and we don't know what it's coming from, that's very bad. So so everyone has has the pulse oximeters. I go back to school and I'm getting my graduate degree, but I'm focusing on breath work. And still, even right after I finished undergraduate, I'm like, okay, let me just go right back into graduate, because I want to keep focusing, keep digging into the research on breath work. And it was just I think it was the second class I was taking. I started reading as I was digging into breathwork research. I don't know why I didn't come upon this researcher, this scientist sooner, but it wasn't until then that I did. And this was Xavier Warrens, who's the French physiologist who's done so much work in the area of exhaling to low lung volume and showing that the body can achieve intermittent hypoxia. And of course, he's working with athletes, but I just found that so fascinating. And I started reading all of his papers that he has published with his group of researchers. And he even, I forget what the organization is called, but there's like a HYPOXiX organization in France, and all of the HYPOXiX scientists are a part of it, and he's one of them. So they've really deemed him, even though he only performs hypoxia with breath work, they really have kind of knighted him and brought him into this organization of like legitimate, amazing hypoxic researchers, because he's produced volumes and volumes of work. And I just found it so fascinating that he could, with low lung volume, with his athletes, achieve similar states of hypoxia that you achieve at altitude. And so as I'm reading, I'm like, this is so fantastic. Wow, this is unbelievable. And this is why this is how it could potentially be beneficial for my clients who are working for performance enhancement. And that's where it started, because I didn't start with the altitude training science. I started with the breath work, somehow came upon Dr. Xavier Warrens, and read all of his research and thought, wow, this is really interesting that someone could get a performance benefit by extending their exhalation and performing breath retentions, looking at, increases in erythropoietin, EPO in the body, even with cyclic apnea, seeing upregulation of HIF1, which is hypoxia inducible factor, which really is the foundation of all of it, because when that thing increases, that's how you achieve all of the positive benefits in your body, whether it's traditional altitude training or even breath hold training. And so, after reading all of his research, I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. Performance enhancement, cool. I like the thought that you can create yourself, you create efficiency in your body. I train a lot of individuals who are tennis players and swimmers, and, no professional athletes, mostly general population exercisers, but these are all like type A personalities, like high achieving. So when they're swimming, they are like swimming and they are competing against themselves. Like I train this 175-year-old this summer. I'm actually going out to train him. And he constantly wants to perform better. And so we started, we also started training this breath training, and even measuring his blood oxygen and seeing, just jotting it down and seeing if he was adapting over time, and seeing if he could improve that oxygenation of his blood, as he was performing the breath work. And I just found that so fascinating. And so when the pandemic did hit, I was finishing up my graduate work, and I decided for my last few classes, because the altitude training I found was so fascinating, that I was going to dig into the benefits of hypoxic training specifically, and looking at all different forms of hypoxic training, whether it's intermittent hypoxic training, whether it's, live high, train low, train high, live low, which for those who don't know, if you're training high, it means you're training high up on the mountain, usually at about 2,500 meters. And then you're coming down, or, if you're living high and training low, you're living up on that mountain and sleeping there overnight to get those red blood cell benefits and all the adaptations that happen in the body. And then you're training in normoxia, which means, just no hypoxic. And so I dug into the research, and I found that all of the performance enhancing benefits were just fantastic. But I also knew for many years as a trainer, in the back of my mind, I always thought, oh, altitude training, that's really great. It's wonderful for athletes. It's wonderful for people who want that competitive edge. They want that extra oxygen efficiency. They want that extra power. So they want to it's like a natural blood doping, because you're increasing your red blood cells. That's great. And for a few of my clients, that was fine. But for the majority of my clients who are postnatal, suffering low back pain, come to me just because they're general population exercisers and they just want to get in shape. when I started to dig into the research on how hypoxia can benefit a general population person and why a normal person who's not interested in performance enhancement, but simply just wants health and longevity, then I started to get really excited, looking at the research and, and improvements in cognition, lessening of symptoms in Alzheimer's patients, all of the hypoxic research that's gone into spinal cord injury, and these certain individuals who didn't even have movement in their hand could breathe some hypoxic gas at 10 or 11% just for a few minutes, and then have like a window of time where they could like move their hand based on the increases in BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor, and serotonin in the body. And that was just like mind blowing to me, like so much research in the area of sarcopenia, which is the natural loss of muscle with age, which, I don't know who doesn't know that though. So I'm just explaining everything. And looking at individuals being able to lift less weight, but see more benefit in terms of body composition change, in terms of sarcopenia, like prevention of sarcopenia for those who can't lift 85% of their 1 rep max, but when they're training in a hypoxic state, they can increase activation of their fast twitch type 2 muscle fibers, which are the ones that really weaken and start to atrophy as we age. And so diabetics, blood glucose regulation, because of the energy substrate change that happens when we're training in hypoxia, we're increasing the amount of glucose and using more of like a glycolytic pathway when we're training in hypoxia, even at a lower intensity, which is like really beneficial for someone who's diabetic and really needs to use their glycogen and like really drain it and be able to exercise that glucose. So then that after they actually have lowered their blood glucose. And it's so exciting to me, the mountains and mountains of research in the area of the general population person. So then, wheels are turning. Like it starts with breath work, and then I see all this research in altitude training. So I write my final thesis, and my mentor, Dr. Daniel Greitzer, he was amazing. He actually he would like me to go back to his alma mater, North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And he's like, I'm telling you, I can get you in, and I want you to use your thesis, and I want you to use your hypothesis about using breath work to achieve intermittent hypoxia to go deeper into this. I literally have no time right now. I mean, I have a 4 and a 7-year-old. I'm a personal trainer during the day, and then I'm trying to build this online business at night. So it's just like, I don't have time to go to PhD land, but maybe 10 years from now I will, because it's fascinating to me. Because at that point, the thesis was how to the potential therapeutic benefit of using intermittent hypoxia and breath work as a mechanism to achieve health and longevity. And so ultimately we used that. It ended up being published at the American Public University Library for anyone who decides to write papers on hypoxia. And now they can reference the thesis that I wrote. And I also reference it. I use it all the time. I use it for social media because I'm so passionate about it. So I write this, this is me like being the mad scientist during the pandemic. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I found this research. I'm writing this 200-page graduate paper, and I'm training clients, and I'm blow, hiss, soft shishing, loud shishing. Wait, what happens if I blow all the air out and then I perform short breath retentions? And here's me with the pulse oximeter on my finger, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I can become hypoxic faster because of the 8-second exhale, because I've drained my lungs of air, but I've also worked to a lower lung volume than usual, which goes back to Xavier Warrens, who did all of his research on exhaling quietly, kind of like, like Patrick McCowan, like exhale, quietly, but don't force it out. And then, do some walking or, his protocol. But because of the forced exhalation, you're actually working a little bit lower to lower lung volume than usual. You're blowing that dead space out of the base of the lungs, and you're becoming hypoxic quicker, which is good for the purposes of trying to achieve intermittent hypoxia with the breath. So I became obsessed with this concept, and it took, it was over the pandemic. I was experimenting a lot with it. I didn't really start building the online business yet at that point, but I was doing a lot of experimentation with very close clients who felt comfortable, I feel comfortable with, and they volunteered to be guinea pigs. So I started having them test their blood oxygen. I'm like, okay, what if you do a breath retention for 2 seconds at the end of the 8-second exhale in conjunction with like a wall sit? okay, do you feel good? Do you feel safe? Do you feel contracted in your core? What's your blood oxygen? And I did all these notes. And I'm like, okay, what if you are doing a easy Pilates and your heart rate's here, and you exhale for 8 seconds, and then you hold your breath for 12 seconds in the Pilates ab. And they're like, oh my God, it's amazing. I feel my abs more. My blood oxygen is getting to like 80. It's only, and because I don't give them a long time to recover in between, it's like hovering between about 80 and 90%. And so it took me about, pandemic was about 2 years. It was 2 years of experimentation, figuring out exactly I knew what the tempo needed to be, because I always was rigid about staying at 60 beats per minute to keep them at the 8-second exhale. But then figuring out the safety of, okay, if the heart rate is high, it's here, stick to the 8-second exhale. Don't do any breath retentions, because I'm not training athletes. They don't need to do that. And also just to keep, to keep stable and keep safe when they're exercising. But then as the heart rate lowers, when they're doing like easy functional movement, they can add like a 2 or a 4 beat breath retention to achieve that blood oxygen that I'm going for, but also feeling good progressively. And then when they're doing core, more stable exercises where the heart rate is very low and they're not performing any kind of cardiovascular challenge, they are adding those longer breath retentions are. So basically I worked the spectrum, and I just created the method where, based on where the heart rate is there, it's inversely proportional with the length of the breath retentions to achieve the hypoxia. Because of course, when your heart rate's really up, you really only need the 8-second exhale, or maybe even a very short breath retention to achieve that state of hypoxia. And so really, after thinking about this and working with the guinea pigs over that time, I started to develop the online methodology. And when I'm saying methodology, because I needed it to be a progressive system, kind of like a typical exercise periodization. I've always been, even when I'm not training an athlete, I still always use like some level of periodization, meaning I'm going to put you in a block of endurance strength for 4 weeks, and then we're going to do like heavier strength for 4 weeks, or we're going to do some recovery for 2 to 3 weeks. Like any, organized good trainer usually would do to help prevent injury. Not everyone believes in it for general population exercises, but I've always believed in just that progressive, changing up what you're doing over the year, so that you can maximize your, the versatility in your body and your strength and your stamina and explosive power and all that. And so I thought, why would we not also train the breath in a progressive nature in conjunction with the exercise? And so I decided for the online programming that I would apply a progressive nature of intensity with the breath work for 8 weeks, in conjunction with the progression of the exercise routine. So ultimately, I have 3 levels in the online programming. 1, 2, and 3. In level 1, you're progressing over the 8 weeks. You probably max out on the 8th week at like 4, maybe like a 4 beat breath hold. Level 2, you start with just the 8-second exhale at the end of 8 weeks. Level 2, you're probably getting a couple of those longer breath holds, maybe 8 seconds, 10 seconds in like the lower intensity movements. And then level 3, we max out at about a 12-second hold, which for those who have done breath retentions, even with workouts, it might not sound like that long.
But it's such a different kettle of fish when there is load, and I don't necessarily mean that picking up a weight, but just challenge and demand on the body.
Absolutely.
And something I'm really curious about is, because we were chatting about this just very briefly before we started recording, have you noticed a relationship between someone's carbon dioxide tolerance and their ability to get into these hypoxic states? Like, does hypercapnia drive them faster than hypoxia? Is it like, I can't sustain the breath hold because the buildup of CO2 is making me need to breathe before I'm able to hit, either duration per second or percentage of oxygen? Like, have you found that my low CO2 tolerance patients can't tolerate the longer breath holds because of the CO2?
Absolutely. 100%. And so it was quickly after I launched the online workout that, and of course, my husband and I are actually we're doing this all ourselves. So everything's happening too slowly, but after about a month, I decided, okay, everyone needs to take a CO2 test to begin. And I started making certain recommendations for, like if your CO2 tolerance is here, I want you to stick to level 1 and do not even attempt any breath retentions for, a minimum 8 weeks, maybe even longer. And then retake the CO2 tolerance test every 4 to 8 weeks to look at the improvements, and wait until you're at about here to even attempt a level 2 or attempt breath holds. Because personally, I try, and this is one of the other reasons that over time, I started to become more and more excited about using breath or developing a strategy for intermittent hypoxic breathing, is because I think because I'm training general population individuals and not necessarily elite athletes, because elite athletes, like if they're going to do breath holds, they're going to do like a hold for like 30 seconds and do a sprint, like they're going to go there. They're probably, they can benefit from doing my program, but my program is really designed for like the general population person who like wants like a safe method of performing intermittent hypoxic breathing. And that's a lot of that is based on their carbon dioxide score, and also, the history of cardiovascular and neurological and all that stuff. But, as I started looking at, like Wim Hof and other breathing, like more extreme breathing methods, I think they're wonderful. And granted, sometimes when you're doing like the most intense of the breath work, you're seated. But there are some people who are, of course, part of the Wim Hof method is that you're moving sometimes when you're doing the breath holds. And, the feedback that I've gotten from people, and even for myself, is that because you can hold your breath for longer, because you're working in a hypocapnic state and you don't have those triggers, I see blood oxygens going way, way, way down, like 60%, like sub 70% quite frequently. Now I can't say with confirmation that is horrible for even, for like, milliseconds or even seconds at a time. But I know from digging into the altitude training research that you only need to be between 80 and 90% to see the benefits. And so I think that's why I was so obsessed with doing all of this. And I'm still running informal trials where I have people come in and do my program for 8 weeks for free if they'll give me their pulse oximeter scores and their, just like little markers over time, just so I can continue to refine the program and also make sure that my goal of keeping them between approximately 80 and 90% for most individuals. There's always outliers, but I feel passionate about that, just because, there is detrimental hypoxia. Like you go too low and like you get headaches. Like if you chronically are doing it over time, and this is why sleep apnea is bad, because you're getting like chronic, like 40 or 50 episodes of hypoxia over the course of the night. Granted, your sleep is also disturbed. But, really, sleep apnea patients who are seeing those negative consequences, usually their blood oxygen is going to like 65, 70 several times over the course of the night. And so I didn't want to design an exercise program where the majority of individuals were seeing those super low numbers. And I think that many people who perform hypoxic breathing that maybe aren't following like a regulated program, they probably are hitting those numbers, and maybe they just don't even know it. And maybe it's not a big deal for that person. So I'm certainly not saying that. And I'm sure there is like some potential benefit even from doing that here and there every once in a while. But my goal was to try to design something that gave someone a minimum effective dose of that, of that hypoxia. Now, of course, do we need a ton more research in this area? Definitely. There's a ton of research that supports hypoxic training, and using the traditional methods of intermittent hypoxic training, actually being in a hypoxic chamber, breathing the hypoxic gas, or training at altitude. As far as actual research that supports using the breath to get there, not a ton of research. And this is why after I finished my graduate degree, I just annoyed them to the nth degree. And finally they were like, fine, we'll apply for a grant. So through American Public University and New York Institute of Technology out on Long Island, I've been having a pilot study running for the past couple of years, a pilot study because it's not a huge group of people and it's only our first study. So we didn't have a huge grant, but ultimately we were able to look at the breathography technique, which is the 2-second inhale, the 8-second exhale with the progressive breath retentions over the course of, this one was 12 weeks instead of 8 weeks. And we are getting the results in, and we have seen in the experimental group is favored for fat loss, resting metabolic rate, and strength gain. So I'm just hoping that with that success, and we'll publish and go to conferences next year, that we'll be able to get a bigger grant next time, and I'll actually be able to start looking at things like HIF1, VEGF, BDNF, like all the things that we know that are like the factors that represent the positive benefits of traditional hypoxic training. Because if we can start to show, some of those factors upregulated, then we can really start comparing the breath intermittent hypoxic training to traditional hypoxic training. I know we have a long way to go, but it's just the beginning of trying to prove really a proof of concept.
It's super interesting. I want to I'm going to summarize very shortly, just in different terms. So like when AJ's talking about like VEGF, BDNF, HIF, and we come back to this idea of hormesis, right? So VEGF is how we grow new venous tissue, right? New veins and arteries. BDNF, brain-derived, that's how we grow new neurons in our brain. So if we understand this idea, right, of like hormetic stress, dose dependent, right? I give a little bit of less oxygen and my body responds by developing a better highway, right? And growing more stuff to transport the oxygen around. We see this in every form of stress training, whether it's heat shock proteins, cold shock proteins, breath hold inducing these shifts. It's a really important concept, right? And something AJ's mentioned multiple times, which I talk about a lot as well, is right, minimum effective dose is hovering between that 80-90%, rather than trying to drive people down to like, how low can we go? It's a very different mentality. And you've heard AJ talk multiple times about safety being first and foremost. And I think that's so important, because when we are looking at things like breath holding and exercise, it's very easy for the more is better gung-ho mentality to overtake. And it's like, wait a minute, we want to be really cautious with this kind of thing. But when we are cautious and we, maintain kind of that understanding, there's vast benefits to be had. The second thing that I wanted to kind of point to is, notice that AJ is not talking about one session, right? She's talking about 8 weeks of programming at the minimum. And I think that's so important. And again, I talk about this a lot, breath work, it's great if you do one session. It doesn't do a lot though, right? It's this idea that if I can be consistent over a big block of time, that's when we start to really move the needle. And that's such an important point that AJ just kind of volunteered and brought up. It wasn't because, I said, how long do you like, it's a minimum block of time, because that's how long it takes for the body to adapt, right? So none of this is a 1 week training mechanism or a 2 week, it's 8, 10, 12, even longer. And I'm sure some of the clients you work with, it's over months, if not years. So just kind of teasing on that point, can you perhaps just like dive a little bit deeper, not even deeper, but why, in your perspective, right? Why is this not a 2 week training method? Why is it 8 weeks minimum and perhaps ongoing beyond that? Because I think it's important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm for many reasons. I think I chose 8 weeks minimum well, first and foremost, coming from the exercise science periodization, we know that it takes 4 to 6 weeks to start feeling the results or feeling a difference. And then it usually takes 6 to 8 weeks to start seeing the difference. And I know that if I bring someone in and I say, hey, here's a 2 week program, they're not going to feel, nor are they going to see a difference in their body. And that's so key for motivation, for just keeping going over time. And so if someone comes in and I tell them that the program is 8 weeks, they're like, okay, I'm going to do the 8 weeks. And they're most likely, 9 times out of 10, they're going to feel the difference and they're going to see the difference at that 8 week point. And it's much more likely that they are going to make it a part of their life for the rest of their life, And so over my career as a personal trainer, I've certainly toyed with a lot of different kinds of programming, even because I don't want to overwhelm someone at first. So I think, I'll just start them with a 4 week program so that, they're not overwhelmed, or, maybe it's a cost thing, or, whatever drove that decision. but it was never as successful as doing between a 6 and an 8 week program. And I just decided to do 8 weeks because that made the most sense for making those exercise progressions and increasing the intensity gradually over 8 weeks so that the body didn't have to be as overwhelmed at first, but could gradually get stronger in its core and its functional movement, in the large muscle groups and the breathing. And so the breath work, I found that over 8 weeks is really just the minimum. I mean, my pilot study was 12 weeks and I do often wonder if I should even move to 12 weeks, but I think that saying 12 weeks to someone can be a bit overwhelming, but I've kind of found that sweet spot with the 8 weeks. But with the breath training, carbon dioxide tolerance generally for individuals, it's a minimum of 2 weeks before you start to see that carbon dioxide change. And sometimes I will have people take their carbon dioxide tolerance scores every 2 weeks. And I just learned that from the free diving community. I've interviewed so many free divers who are like, yeah, I do my CO2 tables, and I usually see a difference in about 2 weeks. And this chemoreceptors will respond in that period of time. And maybe you've even seen less than that. I just have never tested 1 week at a time.
I usually see the subjective change in a week, and then the objective change is usually 2 weeks. So let's say someone's breath hold time is 20 seconds. Within that first week, they're feeling it's less provocative. It's less, it's becoming a little bit subjectively easier, but the number doesn't change, right? And then about that 2 weeks, now the number's starting to tick upwards. So that kind of fits the same as you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I found is that there are a lot of clients who do the 8 week program, and they start at a fairly low score. And so maybe they're starting just with level 1, and they're only focusing on the 8-second breath, the 8-second exhale in conjunction with all of their movements. And even with just the 8-second exhale, I've seen improvements up to 400% in CO2 tolerance scores. I mean, really, which I'm sure you've seen as well, even from, performing your breath work. It's really fantastic. And I like individuals being able to compare week 1 to week 8. So I've always been a metrics person, and I think that people are motivated by numbers. And so it's nice to have the 8 weeks to see even certain blood markers, like blood pressure. We know that blood pressure changes so much in an individual from certainly hypoxic training, from the increases in nitric oxide in the endothelium, but that also happens with breath work, and so it's amazing to see the lowering of blood pressure over an 8 week cycle. I mean, I've seen that in almost every individual, even people with healthy blood pressures, their blood pressure still goes down a little bit over the period of 8 weeks. And that's something that's pretty easy to test at home. Resting heart rate, even hypoxic response, right? Over the course of 8 weeks, one of the reasons that the breathography has to become more challenging is because their body is also adapting, becoming more oxygen efficient, and is adapting to that, to the hypoxic load on the body. And so in order to stay in that window of 80 to 90%, they actually need to add in the breath retentions, because their body's adapting positively, and I find that you really need that 8 weeks to gradually feel and see those adaptations.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point, and it's something I always try and drive home, that none of these, it doesn't happen overnight, right? It didn't start yesterday, and it's not going to change by tomorrow. So let's plan let's be consistent. Absolutely. For a few more minutes, AJ. So I want a couple of questions that have kind of come through in the chat. Number one, can we get the link to that thesis so people can have a read of it?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to. So I'll send that to you, and I'll make sure that that's available. It's actually, I published it in my free community. I have a free community. It's HYPOXiX.fitness. That's HYPOXiX.fitness. And I created that because I wanted there to be a free space where people could post the results that they were having. That's where I have this free 8 week cohort. You can come in and do a program for free, as long as you're willing to give me your all of your numbers, your pulse oximeter numbers, your heart rate, all that stuff. So it's a pretty fair exchange. It's a little bit of work on the subjects part, but it's great because it keeps me in the in the research. Of course, it's informal research, but I find that informal anecdotal research very powerful because I can compare my own numbers over time and just stay true to the method. But on there, the thesis is there somewhere. I'll find it. I think it's under listenings, a community topic called listenings and readings. And, I'll put stuff like this Zoom interview on there, and, and the thesis is on there. So I'll make sure you guys have that.
Definitely. I'll add that to the recording link. Another question that came through. So when you're talking about CO2 test, what are you using? Are you using Bolt score, maximum exhale? Like what's your go-to?
I'm using the traditional carbon dioxide tolerance test as an entry. Just the inhale, exhale for 8 seconds. And so my carbon dioxide tolerance test is a bit modified just to keep it very regulated, and comparing apples to apples every time. So I don't say take a big inhale, take a long exhale, take a big inhale, take a long exhale, and then on the third one, just exhale as long as you can. I have them do the 2-second inhale, the 8-second exhale, 2-second inhale, 8-second exhale, 2-second inhale, and then the third one, I have them exhale for as long as they can. I do it through pursed lips, but I tell them, of course, not to blow it out like they do in the breathography engaged exhale, because of course, then we're just not getting an accurate score because we're blowing the carbon dioxide off. So I just have them like make a tiny hole, slow the exhale down for as long as possible. And then, we use that score. I know it's a little different than the traditional carbon dioxide tolerance test, but I found that was just a good way to standardize it, and also have it more relatable to the technique that I use. And then I just find, and there could be an argument as to why I should be doing the exhale through the nose, but I just found that like making pursed lips and having them make the same pursed lips every time, just helped with some level of standardization, and also kept it, related to the breath work that they were going to do in the HYPOXiX sessions. So that's the way we do it.
That makes a lot of sense. So in light of time, I'm gonna, last thing is where best place for people to find you, and if you do have a minute of like what's on the cards for breathography and HYPOXiX
absolutely. And so the HYPOXiX.fitness is the great place to introduce yourself to the HYPOXiX method, because that's where you can just get a lot of stuff for free. First of all, you can get in the community, ask questions. You can take one of those free programs as long as you're willing to be one of my guinea pigs. And then I always have, kind of what's going on there. When you're on HYPOXiX Fitness, if you wanted to actually take a class and do my training and be part of my HYPOXiX studio and actually have a membership, it says take a class on HYPOXiX Fitness, and you can just click take a class, and that takes you to a website called hypoxix.studio. And on there, I have 8-week cycles that are packaged on little tiles, and they're all 8-week progressive cycles, level 1, level 2, level 3. We move through the progressive 8 weeks of breathography. There's core classes, mobility classes, recovery classes. I've been working on that for about the past year and a half when we first started. And I do 2 or 3 live classes a week. I even, because of my former career as a professional dancer, I even have some dance cardio in there using the breathography technique. If you want to work your brain like crazy, try to do breathography as you're like, shadow boxing. It is crazy hard, but I've actually had a lot of online customers who like it. So it's fun. And so I do try to make the workouts fun. I'm like a science nerd, but I also like to have fun. I'm also an artist. I'm a dancer and a singer. So I love all that as well. And then ultimately I'm pretty active on quite a few, well, only for the past like year have I been really active on my social medias, because I realized, oh yeah, I'm building an online business. I should do this. And now I'm having fun with it. So I have an Instagram account. It's aj.fisher.train. And I think I have the same handle on, I have a TikTok account now. I'm on YouTube as HYPOXiX Studio. And I publish things like this on the HYPOXiX YouTube channel. I'm also on I'm like everywhere now. It's crazy. I'm on Facebook.
I would say to people, jump onto Instagram and follow AJ, because it's tidbits that are just like, you can do this in your bathroom. You can do this in your hallway. You can do this with your kids. Like, it's the stuff that I think is so important, that it doesn't need to be lay down your yoga mat. You got to have 30 minutes. Like, here's what you can do in 2 minutes. Right. And I
exactly
talk about that a lot. So I think that's a really good way to introduce yourself to this kind of work.
Absolutely. And for any of the trainers in the room, this is really exciting. I don't know why I haven't mentioned this yet. I think because it's so new. A certification that I wrote, the breathing core, that teaches you how to perform breathography. There's no hypoxia element to this one. This is simply how to use breathography to stabilize your spine and use it in conjunction with exercise. It just got approved by huge training organizations, by NASM, AFAA, ACE, and just 2 days ago, NSCA, which is very exciting to me because I'm, hugely respect all of those organizations. But the great thing about it is that, if you did decide to take the course, it's now a continuing education unit. So you could use that for if you're affiliated as a trainer with any of those organizations, you can take the course. And you can also find that on hypoxix.fitness. And so I would love, love, love for you to take that. It's all of this is kind of new. We're like diving into this. It's so exciting. It's really, I've been dreaming about teaching breathography to a larger community for a long time, initially for the purposes of decreasing the risk of injury during exercise. And now it's turned into this progressive hypoxic approach. And it's all incredibly exciting.
Well, it's been an awesome evolution to watch. And we very much appreciate your time for coming and sharing your passion. It's obviously something you're super passionate about. So thanks for coming on. I'll kind of link to everything you've mentioned today. I'll pop these in, so the handles for the HYPOXiX, the YouTube channel, Instagram, etc. So everyone knows where they can come and find you.
Thank you so much, Campbell. And these conversations with you are also so amazing because I can see how passionate you are, and your happiness and your joy and your curiosity about the subject definitely is like a catalyst for just amazing conversations. So thank you so much for bringing me on.
Yeah, well, we'll keep the conversations going, and we'll chat again
soon.
Soon.
All right. Bye-bye. Have a great night.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.